people that don't get notified. So if it's at the discretion or however, we need to notify some neighbors.
And I don't want to throw a monkey wrench into it, but the city went through this, and what really needs to be, and it works. It works better in some places than others, but posting a sign that says notice of hearing, and then people will at least stop and look if there's interest in it on the property. And out in the county, you may never see the notice if it's directly on the property. I don't know, just
Mr. Chairman, posted notice is the number E.
yeah.
So we do have that. So we're just talking about either a specific distance range or number, or just that neighbors will be notified to the best of our ability.
So if I have one person that encompasses 90% of it, that surrounds it, and then I have to find 20 neighbors.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
so Rob wants to do something, and it's out in the middle of his pasture. How far are you going to have to go? How many miles away are you going to have to go to find 20 people to notify Rob?
Well, the gravel pit tonight, they put a sign out there by the road, and my son was out there. He saw the sign. He said, "What are they doing?"
But if county had to call or notify,
You'd have
send
to come
notices to
almost all the
people
way to Poison Spider School,
to get 20
coming
people.
this way, and then going clear to Waltman. You'd have to go past Waltman to Powder River.
So should we look at the distance rather than the
Yeah, I
number
don't,
of
20
county?
neighbors is pretty tough to find out
Maybe either
there.
or, whichever it is, because if you
Whichever
have
the
20
lesser.
neighbors within a 1 mile radius,
Mr. Chair.
that's fine.
Yes. Commissioner
What
Glazer?
about saying at the beginning of this sentence, unless impractical as determined by the department, at a minimum 20 neighboring property owners, so that, it's just not practical in Rob's case. And I would think that discretion could be utilized appropriately. I mean, I think they're going to know if there are two neighbors, then they're going to notify them, and we shouldn't have to struggle for 20 that might be 7 miles away.
Well, why don't we just do a distance or whichever is,
It's
that way if you've got a mile radius and there's nobody in that, you don't have to contact them. If you do have 20 people, or just contact the people that are within that area.
Well, yeah, and I was thinking in that case, like the gravel pit, you could say somewhere in there about adjacent landowners. Because you get out in the country, you're not going to find them 1,000 foot or maybe 20 neighbors, but the adjacent property owners ought to know.
Yeah.
Like down the creek from that gravel pit is Bill Keith. He's in another county, but he's within 2 miles of it.
But
So you ought to be able to notify that adjacent property owner somehow.
doesn't the previous sentence says, notice to be sent to record owners of land immediately adjacent, then also neighboring property owners whose properties are within 1,000 feet, then also any other person who makes a written request for such notice. So it seems like we're already covering those bases.
I would
So-
hope we do, but 1,000 feet, that neighbor is 2 miles down the creek, so that's 10,000 feet.
How about we do all adjacent properties and any of them within a mile?
I like that.
That would probably work. It would work better.
But that could be hundreds if we're in.
Well, if you're in an
A-
incorporated, then Or just specifically say if it's out in the unincorporated area. No, you can't do that.
Can't do that.
If it's in RAM, then maybe, but we're talking about way too many notifications
close
in a
to town.
UR.
Yeah.
So what if we took the 20 people, at a minimum, 20 people, if found within 5 miles? Or something similar to that.
I like adjacent landowners myself, just because, for what Rob was saying, is just, and I don't have any problem with putting a distance, but it's like Peter said, you don't want to have to,
Well, and see, and that's the point, is at that first sentence, right before we start getting into that minimum, there's commas. 1,000 feet excluding right of way of lot subject, or appeal, comma, and any other person who makes written. So somewhere in there, the whole 1,000 feet, or we're in between 2 pages of the problem, or immediately adjacent to subject land, comma, neighboring property owners whose properties are within 1,000 feet. So we're covering both the adjacent and within the 1,000 feet already within that sentence.
I think
We don't
that's
even
right.
need this 20 neighboring thing. We've got the adjacent,
It's
we've got
already
the neighboring
covered.
within 1,000.
yeah, it's already covered.
Yeah, I think you could just strike the whole,
Minimum.
I would be fine with that, but I just want to make sure that the planner doesn't have any counsel that might be something we're not thinking of.
Yeah.
No, the adjacent landowners, the 1,000 feet, the posting, the newspaper, those are generally accepted methods of notification. Putting a standard number on it is a little overbearing.
So let's strike that whole sentence.
yeah.
Yeah,
Make it some thumbs.
I'm good.
Good.
That means we get to jump ahead to 1517,
What page?
or 517, I'm sorry.
178.
Variances,
Dave, what?
page 178.
Thank you.
And here is where we stopped the other night, and I said I wanted to propose new language on some of this. The purpose, applicability, God, I can't talk today, procedure, but in the approval criteria, I would like to did that zoom in? Ooh. That time it did. I would like to update it to this approval criteria, which matches clear requirements for variances. That there are unique physical circumstances or conditions, including irregularity, narrowness, or shallowness of lot size or shape, or exceptional topographical or other physical conditions peculiar to the particular property, and that the unnecessary hardship is due to the conditions and not the circumstances or conditions generally created by the provisions of the zoning ordinance. That because of such physical circumstances or conditions, there is no possibility that the property can be developed in strict conformity with the provisions of the zoning ordinance, and that the authorization of a variance is therefore necessary to enable a reasonable use of the property. That such unnecessary hardship has not been created by the appellant. That the variance, if authorized, will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or district in which the property is located, nor substantially or permanently impair the appropriate use or development of adjacent properties, nor be detrimental to the public welfare. And that the variance, if authorized, will represent the minimum variance that will afford relief and will represent the least modification possible of the regulation in issue. That the variance, if authorized, is consistent with the general intent and purpose of the development plan and this resolution. In granting any variance, the board may attach such reasonable conditions and safeguards as it may deem necessary to implement to purposes of this act and zoning ordinance. The applicant shall have the burden of demonstrating that the proposal satisfies the applicable review criteria.
Christie, do you have that highlighted so we can, I'm trying to,
It's a replacement.
It's a replacement
For all of the subsections under D, right?
for all of the subsections under D.
but that way we know that they're replacements is
So-
all I'm saying.
This is how D reads right now,
Right.
and this is the proposed new language.
So you'd replace all of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all
Yes.
that with the language that you're proposing in the Word document?
Yes, sir.
So in the new document that you get it done, it'll be in blue or something?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
That's what I was asking, is so that we could positively identify what was changed. And
Just a minute, I gotta read.
Do you want me to have her
Me
one
too.
print it?
Do you want me to print
That
it?
would be awesome.
Yeah, if you want to send it to Michelle, can you?
I think so.
You can read it to me all
I
day.
cannot.
Yeah?
No, I do not have a printer on here.
No, can you email it to Michelle?
I do not have my email on here either. Let me,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Well, I was going to ask Christie a couple questions.
here, actually, try, this is the closest to it. Yes, sir.
So this is materially different from what we currently have, right?
This is more clarifying than what we currently have.
And what's the source of this? I mean, I'm assuming it's been used in other communities somewhere, that you didn't just make it up.
No, this came from research from what other communities are using in regards to matching the language of the three-part test for a variance.
So,
What's the Board of Adjustment?
That would be the Planning and Zoning Board.
So that language was changed.
Yeah,
And then it would come to the commission.
yes.
This is just going back to the standard 6 criteria we use for approving a CUP,
For a variance,
for a variance.
yes.
I got a question for you on number 4. Will not alter the essential characteristics of the neighborhood or district which the property is located. Isn't that the reason why you asked for a variance, is because that's exactly what it's doing? Yeah, but it says the essential characteristics of the neighborhood. But if you change one property in the neighborhood, that could actually change that whole thing.
Then as a board though, then as a board of, the zoning board or our board could say no.
I know, but it says that you can't, no variance will be granted unless that happens. At the top, this top sentence. So that's, to me, that's exactly the reason why you ask for a variance, is because it's in non-compliance with the neighborhood.
So, Mr. Chairman, in the character of the neighborhood, it'd be, if it's residential, it wouldn't be a commercial use. If it's residential in the neighborhood, it wouldn't, a variance wouldn't allow you to build a second house on that if the zoning doesn't allow it. So it's keeping that type of character of the zone.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
so number 6 is, in my reading, the same as number 5 of the current general intent and purpose. So I guess depending upon, well, let me leave number 4 of our current one in that says variance will not result in the gain in use. So it's the same as our current number 6. Number 5 on the proposed is similar to number 3. The variance sought is the minimum variance necessary to provide balance between the purpose of the regulation sought to be varied and its impact on the applicant. In number 5, I think what we have is better than what's proposed, in that the language with what's proposed is will represent the least modification possible. That, to me, is almost, I think, a trap for the unwary on establishing their burden to obtain a variance. And I think that the minimum variance necessary to provide the balance between the purpose of the regulation sought to be varied and its impact on the applicant, that's what we have, is better. So I like our number 3 better than this number 5. Number 4, the variance, if authorized, will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. To Commissioner North's point, what we have already is in the current number 5, granting the variance will not impair the use of adjacent property or alter the character. So the first half of that is similar, but the word essential is now put in. I think that the word essential is better for an applicant and less restrictive, because there's a difference between changing the character and changing the essential character, I believe. So I kind of like the number 4, at least the first part of number 4 and what's been proposed. Number 3 is similar to what we have in number 2. So I see a lot of similarity, but there are substantial and material differences too.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We're looking at both, right? So to Peter's point, he likes this, some of the language on the old one and some of the points from the new one. What I'd suggest right now is that we go through the old one, figure out what we want to keep and what we don't, then go through the new one, figure out what we want to keep and what we don't. That way it's a little less confusing for me and maybe somebody else or whoever out there, but that's just my suggestion, is that we split these in 2 and go through it rather than try to. Peter was bouncing back and forth and he kind of lost me. Sorry. What are you saying there? Anyway, so that would be my suggestion.
I personally like the way it was written, with number 4 struck out. I mean, that's my personal feeling. I think it's easy to read and easy to understand.
Okay, so basically, number 1, who likes number 1 of the old stuff? Do you want to keep it? Want to switch it to the other one, or is there anything in that we need to keep or let go?
I don't have any problem with it.
Can we hang on to that question for just a minute? Let me look at this a little more.
Analyze a little more?
Yeah. So we're just talking about number one?
Yeah, just number one of the old.
I like what we have.
Okay, so keep number one. Everybody good with that?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Number two
I like number two.
of
It's
the
short.
old or
The old one, it's short, sweet, and to the point.
Well, number two of our current one, or the old one, ties to number three
Mhm.
of the new one. So I'm trying to figure out where, so let's compare number two to number three on the proposed, right?
It also goes into number two a little bit too, it looks like, Peter. The special circumstances versus the physical circumstances.
I like keeping it one and keeping it simple. Or
Number two
keep
of
Number
the-
two and keeping it
of
like
the-
it is, keeping
right.
it simple.
Of the current one is simpler than what is stated, but
So what's the proposal on number two of the current? Keep it?
That's my proposal. Just because it's short, sweet, and, I mean, it's clear. To me, it's clear. It's easy to understand, and it covers what we already have.
I do like the last part of number two, though, off the new. Enable the reasonable use of the property. And that's always been a sticking point in some places, is we want to continue allowing people the reasonable use.
And I think we could add that to it. I don't have any problem with adding that portion to that. At
Right
the end of
after
two.
willful modification?
Land or building necessary to enable the reasonable use of the property. How's that?
Where'd you wind up with number two? So we
So-
as current, and then you add,
So right after building, you add necessary to enable the reasonable use of the property.
Yep.
I don't think those two go together.
You don't?
No, the number two, the special circumstances and conditions do not result from any willful modification of the land or the building. So that's something that is within the control of the applicant. So basically, if they're creating the hardship, traditionally, you wouldn't let them create the problem and then get a remedy for it. That would treat them
It's not-
unfairly. So then,
But it may not be them that created the issue. It may be a rezoning issue or something else.
Or they bought a non-compliant
Yes,
lot or
non-compliance,
something like that.
yeah, I don't think that clause necessary to enable the reasonable use of the property goes with that sentence. I like the existing sentence in number two. I just don't think that clause, which I don't mind it somewhere else maybe, but I just don't think it works well with the rest of that.
Okay, so everybody good with keeping two as is?
I'm good.
I'm good.
There was one comment over here about if you buy a piece of property, then it's got a non-conforming issue on it. Doesn't that stay with the property?
Right. So, sorry about that. So like, just a lot size or whatever that's outside of the compliance for the standard lot size, or has additional building or something like that, we don't want to stop somebody from being able to use that property down the road if it can, if they can get the setbacks, if they can do whatever, then they should be allowed to be able to continue to use it. We don't want to stop any.
But if
Reasonable
somebody
use, right?
buys it and it's non-conforming, then it's still non-conforming?
Yeah.
Grandfathered in, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Maybe that's what we should,
And if you're happy with the current language, that's fine.
we're happy with the
Stay
current
it.
language. We're just trying to
So
figure
far,
out
we're
how
just
to
trying to see if there's anything
add the
better.
rest of it on there or how we want to do that. I think that's something that we ought to do is maybe say something to the nature of this does not,
There's already language in there.
So
Somewhere else.
number three, The variance sought is the minimum variance necessary to provide the balance between the purpose of the regulation sought to be varied and its impact on the applicant. Or number 5, on the proposal, a variance if authorized to represent the minimum variance that will afford relief and will represent the least modification possible of the regulation in issue.
I like 3 that we currently have. I think it's easier to read and understand.
I do too.
Yeah.
Number 4 is what's deleted. The variance will not result in a gain in use, service, or income from applicant to a greater extent than available to other landowners in the vicinity.
Just
This
strike.
one I would like to have left in. That's a pretty classic element of granting variances, and it's, I think, appropriate that, that we don't, I just think that it's appropriate for the body to look at whether or not it is going to be an unfair gain in use, because the whole purpose of zoning is for consistency in a given area. So that's why I'd like to see it stay in.
I'm just the opposite. I'd like to see it come out and stay out because, to me, that's the reason why you ask for a variance. And that's the reason why it has to go through the different process to see if it's going to be granted or not. And whether it provides a gain in use or service, a lot of that stuff is highly subjective. There's nothing hard and fast on whose idea of what that is. So I'd like to see that number 4 remain out and struck out the way it is right now.
So if it stays in, and gain in use, in my mind, is that the gain in use is allowing somebody a variance that no other neighbor can do what they're doing. And so you're actually circumventing at that point the zoning in and upon itself. All your neighbors can't shoot off fireworks, but you're given a little, your own little exemption. And that
Well, they can apply for a
We tr-
variance too if they want
we,
to.
but we try to not allow for special groups. Everybody talks about that, you know, you don't want to have your own special little group or whatever, or special legislation for one person, one particular. I think it needs to stay out.
But isn't that what it's saying that you're doing?
No, the variance process more or less isn't to gain special use, being able to put in, say, a commercial business or a restaurant in an area. That's a gain in use. The thing is maybe your lot is too small, and so you're going to have to violate by a couple of feet or whatever to be able, for a setback, to be able to put in the shed that your neighbor also has. That's how I see it in my mind.
So a variance so that you could go ahead and build something on it.
Yeah, that your neighbor also has the ability to, because their lot size was big enough.
Wouldn't necessarily be a gain. It'd just be able to use the property.
No, I'm
He's in.
in for, I'd like to see this stay in, not deleted.
That's it. Okay. I like it, yeah.
I like it in too.
The next one, compare the use of adjacent property with versus number 4 on the proposal. Can you blow that up just a little more?
Excuse me.
I'm good with number 4 up there.
I don't mind how it's. I don't mind how 4 stands right now. It's simple.
I agree.
I'm good with the way it is on our old one.
Yeah.
What about adding the word essential in front of the word character?
I'd be all right with that.
What is the definition of essential? I mean, I'm not being facetious. I'm asking you what that really is how do we define that?
Well, I don't know that there's a definition or that we in particular need one. I think what it's saying is, going back to one of the points that you made at the very beginning of this, just about anything you do can alter the character of the neighborhood. You put one mouse out there, and maybe that alters it. But that's not going to alter the essential character of the neighborhood, which may be rural, may be 20 acres and a mule kind of stuff. So that's why I think if an applicant comes in, nobody's going to be able to say, "I'm not in any way altering the character." I think that's different, and I think an applicant can prove that they're not impacting or changing the essential character of the neighborhood. So that's why I think it's better for property
No,
owners.
that's fine. I just wanted to know what your thought patterns were by adding that.
I'm good with essential.
That's fine.
Put essential in front of character. We're at 5 now, right?
You're
Since
right.
we kept
You're right.
4.
Yeah.
Consistent with the general intent and purpose of the plan and the resolution. That's pretty much the same as number 6, so I think we just leave it as is.
Sounds good.
All right.
Yeah.
And leave the last one in too. You guys okay with that?
Now, on the new proposed, there is language after 6 and prior to, so any of that need to be added in granting any variance, or no variance at the top, no variance in strict application. Do we need any of that language?
I don't think we do, because I think a lot of that's already covered.
I guess I don't mind those 2 sentences, but unless we're covered somewhere else.
I don't see them. The second one is that the burden's on the applicant. That makes sense. And the first one is reasonable conditions and safeguards. And that's going to be a case-by-case basis, so I don't have a problem with that.
Just add it into the bottom.
I think that first sentence at the bottom, that's pretty much covered in all the bullet points. That's the main gist of everything that we just went through. The second sentence should be in there, though. That is their burden to demonstrate if they're coming in to ask for a variance. They need to show why.
But is it anywhere up there, does it say the board may attach such reasonable conditions or safeguards?
No,
That isn't up there.
it isn't up there. So I'm not opposed to adding it. It seems like that's, and I shouldn't say self-evident, but in my mind, it'd be self-evident that
Yeah.
that's what we're looking at. So
I'd say leave them
Sure.
both in.
your guys' discretion.
We'll leave what both in?
The last two
last
sentences.
I don't see where they hurt, and
They aren't gonna
and
hurt.
actually clarify that they can.
They can put some
Yeah.
conditions on it.
So add the last 2 sentences of your proposed, please.
then the next one I have is 521.
Twenty-one,
521 A to B,
183.
183. There was a question about timing. About making appointments. And so this is in the enforcement. At this point, an inspection is a drive-by for compliance.
So this was Commissioner Milne's suggestion, I think, and was the comment or the response that you already kind of have done that? You're already having a dialogue before you're
making
doing
notice.
inspections
Mhm.
anyway?
Okay. So I think my thinking on this was when I look at inspection, I'm thinking not just a drive-by inspection, but a actual walkthrough inspection.
Lori makes arrangements for, she sends out the letters, and works with them.
So, but is she required to?
To
So,
send letters.
yeah.
Yeah, so if you have a zoning violation, you have a letter that goes with that.
Usually
Yeah,
she
but what if
goes-
we're not even at that point, though? What if she sees something, or somebody, a county employee from the department sees something, pulls over, drives in the driveway, knocks on the door, and the homeowner may or may not know whether or not they need to show them the barn or whatever it is. So,
I think that's where I was kind of going with it, was more of a reported violation or inspection or something like that, or something she sees from the county road or wherever, and she wants to go take and make sure she's seeing what she's seeing, or compliance is seeing, that it is a violation, but they need to actually make entry onto that property. How do they do that?
I don't believe she makes entry onto private property without permission.
No, she can't. If she does, she can get trespassed.
Right, and that's why, that is just kind of, courtesy,
can I
need
ask,
to make a,
is there a problem with inserting after reasonable notice? So making inspections after reasonable notice when needed to ensure compliance with this resolution?
I like that.
So does that include, some of the inspections can just be from a visual from the street?
Yeah, so I think that if it's it's called the public view. And if it's in the public view, then you don't need to provide
Right.
notice.
I'm just,
Making inspections when needed, and if entry onto property, yeah, I see the difficulty there.
yeah.
I think they would be in trespass, though.
They are. They can be trespassed if they're not invited onto private property.
Right, this is more, again, going back to a thought where they see a potential or possible, or it's reported that there's a potential or possible violation by a neighbor or whatever, and they're not able to see it from the road. How are they going to handle that investigation at that point? Either invitation or through a warrant or such. So I'm just trying to look for a reasonable way to work with property owners rather than just,
So inspections are a lot of drive-bys and a lot of using other resources. So maps, visuals, what was there before, what's there now, was there a building permit, doing that type of research rather than entering property.
Could you put reviewing, contacting, and reviewing, let's see, reviewing and contacting the owner of record? Somewhere in there that says that they will be contacting the owner?
But what if there's no violation and then they don't even need to worry about it anymore?
Then the rest of it, so they wouldn't have to contact them.
And if you
And-
all are good with it, I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, we haven't had any issues or complaints in regards to this, and the methods that Lori uses. As far as, inspections are really a visual, what you can see, as you go by and then using the other data.
Right, I'm not saying what Lori's doing is wrong or anything like that. I'm just looking forward.
Okay.
So, if nobody's worried about it, then
Nobody seems to be jumping on the bandwagon on that one.
let's move on then.
All right.
We're out of here.
So then, the next one I have is 522, and that's on page 14, because I don't know if your numbers are out of order as mine are.
22,
522 is the next one.
that'd be on 184. Nonconformity.
184, C1 and 4.
This, which one? Oh,
So 522, C1 and C4.
Non-conforming uses?
The question is, it appears they're contrary to each other, and I'm not sure how. So C1 says, all nonconforming uses are subject to reasonable restrictions designed to protect public health, safety, and welfare, and are not affected by any change of ownership. Number 4. Is the discontinuance. If an active and continuous operation of a non-conforming use is discontinued for a period of 12 consecutive months, all subsequent uses shall comply with the use for the district in which the use is located. For purposes of this subsection, a use is discontinued if any of the following apply. The use is abandoned if the owner or party responsible for the use provides an overt act or failure to act that implies the owner's renunciation of the use. The use ceases or terminates, including cessation of all activities associated with the use, or the use is declared a nuisance. So as long as the use is in use, it will pass to subsequent owners.
Yeah.
At any point in time, the use stops for 12 consecutive months. That lot reverts back to the standard zoning requirements.
Yeah,
So,
I don't see where they're.
well, if they had a building, if it's non-conforming and they had a building that was part of the non-conforming, then you wouldn't go make them take it out. If it's, yeah,
No.
You just couldn't.
just couldn't do it again.
Right.
this is basically with the use, is what it really comes down to, of the property.
So did that clear it up with the,
Yeah, the only, I know originally I had said something about it, but in my second draft, I didn't say anything about it. In my first draft, the reason why I said it appeared to be, having to think back a long time now, is because when it said that, grandfathered is continual all the way through, and then it turned around and says, but if you don't do it for 12 months, you lose it. That's the part that's where I was coming up with the difference, I mean, as far as it being conflicting as far as what it was actually saying. I don't know how, I understand what the rules are, but I'm not quite sure how else to word that. Unless you put that all in one sentence and say grandfathered is continuous as long as it isn't vacated for 12 months or more or something like that. I don't know if that would be a better way of stating that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Or am I clear as mud?
It's a little muddy.
Okay.
So you think that it should be up towards the top on non-conforming uses?
Well, when we're talking about if it's grandfathered in, say the grandfather continues as long as that use is not vacated for over 12 months. Instead of it saying it's permanent, and then you turn around and say, yeah, but if you don't do it for 12 months, it's not permanent. That's the part that's conflicting. So if we're saying that the property is grandfathered as long as that use is not discontinued for 12 months, have that all in one phrase instead of going back and forth.
So you'd like to change the language in DA? Because the first one is just
so the
saying it
first
doesn't change from ownership. Number 4
Yeah,
is dealing with the
ownership
discontinued.
really doesn't have anything to do with it. If it's still grandfathered as long as they continued that use over the 12-month period, within that 12-month period. If they take their livestock off, but they bring it back at month 11, they're still grandfathered. So that's why I'm saying it's easier for people to understand if you say, okay, the property is grandfathered as long as you continue the use and there isn't a break in that use for more than 12 months. I'm not quite sure.
That's what
My
it
wife
said.
gives me that same look all the time when I try to explain stuff to her.
That's what it says in sub A.
That's where I'm saying if you just put that phrase in there, as long as that use is continued, not discontinued for more than 12 months. Because the grandfather goes away. If you quit using it for 12 months, you lose that grandfather. And as long as
Grandfather just means that the nonconformities that are previously set up, with them there, as soon as this is adopted, with them there, they're still in play.
right,
But grandfather's just, it's nonconformities, and then those grandfathered nonconformities apply, the rules for nonconformity still apply to the grandfather. I don't understand.
I don't understand what you're trying to accomplish.
I'm just trying to clarify it a little bit so that when people, if they read this, it's like you're grandfathered as long as you maintain that use. If you don't use it for 12 months, that's when you're going to lose it. That's the part that a lot of people don't understand. Is that it's got to be an annual use on that property, or else it disappears. You lose that conformity.
So you want
Or
to say it's similar
nonconformity.
to grandfather nonconformities are valid until,
Unless
they-
that use is vacated for more than 12 months.
That's what
Well,
the
that's only
first,
one
that's
of
what
the-
4A says.
Yeah,
If
that's-
active and continuous operation of nonconforming use is discontinued for a period of 12 consecutive months, all subsequent uses shall comply, and then it goes on, the use,
Yeah, I'm
the
reading.
use is considered, I don't,
Yeah, I'm reading it that way, that it's forever unless.
And then it
Let's continue.
specifies
And
what
that's what I'm
unless is.
saying, is just that unless,
But there's that whole discontinuance section that
Yeah.
describes what that is.
I'm okay with it as it is.
I'm good with it too.
You good? All right, we're good.
All right, so then we're skipping down to 523, which is page 193.
193.
All this blue.
All blue.
Holy cow.
okay, I'll
Well,
jump
this
in.
is
I'll
one of
jump,
them.
I'll jump into this one.
Okay.
Just basically, I don't have any problem with the county approving the name of the street so we don't have duplications in different areas with the different cities, the different towns for emergency response and stuff like that. I do believe that the current locations that we already have named, the streets that we have named, should remain so. And that we also should allow the developer to come up with their own names as long as it doesn't conflict with a current name that we already have.
So you're talking about,
Page 194C, I think.
on C, yeah, the approved list, but you could put a deal, that'd be the approved list. If they don't like one of them, how do they just come up with something else?
They generally come up with something and we discuss it.
And so then you look at it and see if there's a conflict somewhere.
Correct.
But in here, does it say names from an approved list or ones that they pick out?
Yeah, it does. It says it has to be an approved list from the county. That they have, the county has the list.
Where's that?
It's,
Sub C.
Yep.
24C.
194C.
You know, it says the county has to come up with a list of the name of approved names, and instead of,
C, names from approved list.
E?
C.
Charlie.
190
keep going
page
down.
194, C.
Keep going down.
so
Whoa, right there.
I just want to make sure that whoever's developing it has that opportunity to come up with their own names, as long as it's not conflicting with another street name somewhere in the MPO or whatever else. So that's all I want to make sure we do.
But not necessarily limited to,
What they have. I mean, if they want to choose from a name that you have, that's fine, but if they want to come up with some really strange name, as long as it's not really bad.
it doesn't have to come off the approved list.
That's what I'm,
So we work with the approved list first. If somebody wants to do something different, we review that for appropriateness. But then we can always fall back to the approved list.
Well, it
So
doesn't say
how-
that, though.
Yeah, but it didn't.
How is it
How do we put it
memorialized
in
in
language?
this?
Can
that
you,
will
can
do
you
that?
say this? Can you say all road names must be selected from, recommended for approval and approved by the board, comma, unless otherwise agreed?
Yeah, unless otherwise agreed upon. Just something in there.
Yes.
well, like I said, just as long as it doesn't conflict with the streets that we already have, it really shouldn't make much difference, as long as it's, they can pick it whatever they want to, if that's their third toe's
I think-
name or their horse's name or something else, and
But I think, Dave, this is also to, if we're off the air and off the record, maybe having a street that's called Peckerwood or something like that, it may be offensive to
we're not off the
the
record.
average person.
I don't know whether we're gonna get into that offensive stuff.
That's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
nah.
I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that the first priority is that if they've got reasonable names that aren't,
It's not gonna be woke,
Yeah.
rules.
that's all I'm saying, is just
But you
give
do
them
have-
the opportunity to come up with their own names as long as it's not conflicting or obscene or whatever
It's on
else.
TV
So,
and
so, does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. The other thing is for the addresses,
where is that up here?
that is in C3.
C, the same C3
Procedures.
or different C3?
Huh?
It's up above, it'd be,
C3, it talks about the size, the address is established,
Where, I'm sorry, where are we?
C3,
193.
Okay, so road addressing.
Yes.
C3,
5.23, C.
yes.
I do not have any issue with this at all for new addresses. However, it should not be mandated for current locations that are already established. If you've got a subdivision that's been there for a long time, they ought to be able to put the lettering out or the numbering, according to what they prefer. With the current computerized system and all of our EMS systems, they plug it in and it takes you right to it. If you've got a visible address, and that's all I'm saying, it just needs to be a visible address. But it says on here that you can't even have it on your house. Well, you drive through a lot of these neighborhoods, and that's the only place they do have it, is mounted on their house, and they're large numbers that you can see. They're a lot bigger than a 3x3, but you can actually see them. So I think this needs to be applied only in new areas that are being developed. Because that's where you have the biggest problem.
Is this grandfathered?
This is brought in from our current zoning resolution. We are talking about the procedures. Generally, this is done for with new construction and when they're getting a new address. And we do ask for it to be on the fence post or driveway for those safety locations. That way, if your house is 50 feet back, you can still see.
In building right now, or used to, I don't know if they still do. Do you know if they still do give those, that plaque out with the numbers already on it?
That you got to put on there.
on a new one, you probably paid for it, but then when they
Yeah.
get faded out, you've got to replace
Oh,
it.
yeah.
And at that time, an example would be in some of these subdivisions that have been around for a long time, you can see the front of the house, you can see the numbers, and it's not really applicable there. And like I said, the longer the subdivision has been there, all those properties are in the system. When you type it in, when you're dispatched to an area, it brings everything up right on your screen and shows you exactly where that location is and the whole thing. It's not like it was when these first came about. I don't have any problem, like I said, there is a time gap between when when a subdivision goes into a place or a new property is developed and that's updated into the computer system. And sometimes that may take a year or a year and a half, but they do get all those taken care of. And by that time, updating the numbers and other stuff isn't quite as critical.
So to progress, what do you want to do?
I want to make that strictly for new developments.
I see where you're coming from, but I think fire service, emergency, anything, sheriff, yeah, they punch in the number and it should take them to where they're supposed to go. But with the phones the way they are, sometimes it doesn't take you to where you need to go. I guess I'm all right with having
Well,
the
well,
numbers out
the-
front.
The phone systems are totally different.
Well, it is.
That's a totally
than
different
CAD.
program than what you use when you're being dispatched. Because you're right, the phones aren't always, it's just like they don't always show you which roads are closed and everything else. You can't rely on
Right.
your GPS when you're driving down the road to make sure you stay on the road. But
As I see it, this is an established system. It isn't broke. I don't see why we should monkey with it.
Yeah, I think it's a safety issue, and I don't think that the county's going to go out and really be hardcore and, knock on every door. I think
Just Dave's
I think
now.
they're pretty busy, yeah. So
Retro.
I'm okay with
if they
leaving
can't read mine, they're in
I'm okay
real
with
trouble
leaving it
because
like
they're
this.
8-inch letters
These, ours are
right next to the road.
need new ones, but it is kind of a safety deal. I think we ought to leave the number part in. And you can choose to do it or not. County's not gonna, we haven't got people enough to go out there and,
Well, I guess
have
that's,
number
I guess
control.
that's what part of my thought pattern is that who's going to enforce some of these rules that we have in place? Again, I would, if they're getting a building permit,
then,
they do it. And that's what I'm getting at, is that if
We're
it's a
in the
new
definitions.
development.
yeah. I guess we're gonna leave it. What do we-
We are going to go to we're going to go to the Bs. So 199. Building height. It's unclear what, like, the direction or the language that was being requested.
Yeah. Building height, yeah, this is that one we talked about.
Oh, wait a minute. Where are you at?
Page 199?
Bottom of 99.
Well, on 197, go back to 197.
We
Did the
passed,
size of that on accessory structures. That should be 200 instead of 120.
So an accessory structure starts at 120 square feet in regards to commercial and then moves to 200 for residential. So as a base definition of an accessory structure, the base measurement starts at 120.
Yeah, but it says that you have to have zoning certificate. And if you're in residential, you don't need to have zoning certificate if it's under 200. That's what I'm getting at.
Right, so this is just the definition of
Well-
the accessory structure.
Should we,
Then it needs to be broken out as such and say 120 in commercial and 200 in residential.
But isn't it broke out in those specific ones as what they are? This is just describing what an accessory building is.
Right, the regulation
Is-
specific to that
provision.
earlier.
Yeah.
it's anything from 120 on up. And then whether it's residential or commercial is based off of the regulation in those sections. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So, are we okay with this?
We can break it out, or we can.
I would
Well, then-
rather
I don't
break
care.
it out.
Well, but
Because
it-
I don't think this is clear.
But all it is saying, an accessory building is this. It doesn't say, if it's more than 120 square feet, it doesn't say whether it's residential or commercial. When you go into each one of those, it will describe what size the accessory building can be. So
Well, then
this
maybe-
is just describing what an accessory building is, not how big it is, other than it starts at 120 square feet. If I go to residential, it's gonna tell me under accessory structure what size and whatever I can do, and it's the same thing when I go to commercial.
Well, maybe it ought to say something to the nature of is dependent on the zoning. And get rid of the number completely.
Pleasure of the board.
I mean, if it already says there's a size in the others, I guess you could, after structure or building, and then strike larger than 120 square feet.
Yeah.
So the measurement, I could add the 200 for residential. That way we actually have a size definition for an accessory structure versus your shed.
Yeah.
Could you just parentheses 200 residential?
We could.
That would be fine. I don't have any problem with that. I think that is just the clarity.
Okay, we're down to what now?
Building height,
Building height.
Back to 199, right?
correct.
At the bottom.
This was from Jim.
I better be able to defend it. What's going on?
I'll help you.
Okay, I think, so my concern on this was the height of the building, if it's on a steep grade at the time, where that measurement is located, if that allows for high enough structure height per the zone. So if you go from the medium point of the slope and the structure to the top, you may not actually be allowing them to go as high as they would be allowed to if they're on flat ground, unless you went from the measurement of the top of the slope grade where they started building to the top of the building. That was, if that makes any sense, that's kind of where I was looking.
If they got rid of any segment of the building, the maximum height on any segment of the building down at the last part, and take it from the top grade, that would be, does that make sense?
So
Yeah.
sentence number 2 doesn't, it specifies that measurement may be taken from the highest adjoining sidewalk or ground surface within a 5-foot horizontal distance of the exterior wall of the building when it's not more than 20 feet above grade.
But that last part, the height of the stepped or terrace building is the maximum height of any segment of the building. That's the part that's an issue. If you're constructing something on a slope and it's a dugout slope, you may have substantially higher portions of that depending on where you're at when you take that. If you're taking that off the downhill side of that slope, it's going to be a lot higher than it is going to be if it's off the sides. And that's where I have issues with that, is because if you're utilizing the slope to your advantage and you're digging out and you're building and you're stair stepping up, that height ought to be measured off the top floor to ground level and not any portion thereof.
But it is saying the mean grade, so it's the midpoint of the land and not anything else in between.
Well, it's just that last
but
sentence is
isn't
the
the-
only part that really, that's what throws everything else out of whack by doing that, with the last sentence on that.
But isn't that just clarifying, if you have a building that's got 2 segments, and one's this high and one's this high, when we're talking about maximum building height, we're talking about this one, the top of this.
But that's not what it says. It says any segment of the building. So basically, if you're measuring it, that's the reason why I'm saying, if you're utilizing the slope to your advantage, and you come out the bottom, and you have a A-frame that goes up, but you're stair stepping, then that eliminates that. That makes that height, that overall height of that building substantially different, or what's not allowed. The only way that you'd get around that is if you went up and put a walkway or something else instead of having the face of the building built in to the complexion of the slope.
But the mean grade is where you measure from.
That's the base. And this is,
No, the mean grade is if it's like this and the house is sitting over here, it's the mean in here.
yeah, no, but
Yeah.
what I meant is that's where you start the measurement. Where you
Right.
finish it is this last sentence.
Right, it's the
which is
highest point.
The highest point.
And it's the, and it isn't, that's not the peak of the roof either. It's the peak of the floor.
It says the highest gable or pitched hip roof.
So you could hit 20 foot isn't that much. If you had 2 stories,
That's what
and so if you add in the pitched roof,
that's what I'm getting at, is if you build an A-frame or something like that, and it's built into the system where you have a walkout basement and then it comes above, you're gonna be way over.
you'd be way over 20 feet.
You know, if you, with your, that's why,
The 20 feet doesn't,
the
this 20.
20
measure
feet
from
is the
the
distance
base of
from
the walkout.
measurement from the sides. But still, the
Measure from
overall
the
height,
side.
the
Measure
height
from the side.
yeah, but
It's
the
still
height
20 isn't enough
restrictions,
If you got a pitched roof.
but the height restrictions that they have in the different zones
Foot's high.
are going, if you build that way, and you've got it,
20 feet, this 20
What-
feet doesn't have anything to do with the maximum height.
if we just took out that last sentence in there, I'd be okay with it.
Mr. Chairman, what I can do is I can go back to Justin and find out what the building code definition is.
That'd be good.
And make sure that this
Okay.
correlates with that.
Thank you.
That's just this segment, not the roof line then.
All right.
It's still,
The next one, we're going to go down to
Oh,
farm
no,
and
no,
ranch.
You're starting with the walkway on the ground.
What was that?
Farm and ranch. It looks like in the P and Z, we're on page 203. In the P and Z, we took out the definition of farm and ranch and left just the farm and ranch operation. Let's see.
I suppose.
So I don't know, and we haven't used farm and ranch operation in when I did a control find. So I don't know what the motivation was for wanting both definitions in. Farm and ranch in the first version is inclusively the land, buildings, livestock, and machinery used in the commercial production and safe sale of farm and ranch products. And this was a Jim thing.
I don't hear anything but crickets on that, so.
Yeah, I don't think that's too bad.
so there was,
23-1-101, I wonder if that just lists all the animals it could be?
so
And-
there was farm and ranch and it was more the physical equipment.
Right, and nowhere is there any reference to farm and ranch in the
Okay.
zoning resolution as a defined use or anything that we would need. So even this farm and ranch operation definition doesn't have anything it's referencing back to.
Well,
Take it
I
out.
see one.
What?
On page 188, and there's a typo, actually. Page
Maybe that's why.
188, and this is a discontinued non-conforming use. And so page 188 at the top, paragraph C, a use is not considered discontinued if blah, blah, blah. And then it says, any temporary cessation of ARM, and that should be farm, or ranch operations consistent with generally accepted management practices. That's the only place I find that phrase, farm or ranch operations in the zoning resolution. So with it being here in non-conforming use and applying on temporary cessations, defining that or further identifying it, I think we need to leave in the definition. There are a lot of folks that do farm and ranch operations.
Do we want both farm and ranch operation and farm and ranch as was in the P and Z, or just the farm and ranch operation?
They both say the same thing.
My druthers, sorry. My druthers, I'd just keep it, both, I
Yeah,
guess.
It doesn't hurt anything.
Doesn't hurt anything. And as long as it isn't conflicting.
Height is the next one. That there was a question
Why
on.
is this all me?
What,
So what was the question?
height on whereabouts is it?
It says add after floodplain slope on height AII, which we did.
And you added slope, okay.
Looks like it was fixed or added. so.
Yep. The next was an operable vehicle. We removed a section as requested. The next was maximum lot coverage. Where the question was why driveways? And we have it,
Do you want to go back to that one? How are we doing on
Which-
time? We're running short.
You got 5.
which one?
35 minutes. We can run a little longer,
So
so
go-
Eric's not here.
Going back
May
to
not be here.
207, inoperable vehicles, just because there are a few more people here, we took out the "or is not currently registered and displaying current license or permits," right?
Mhm.
And that kind of goes back to some of the public comments and some of the commissioner comments. Thanks.
So we're back to maximum lot coverage?
Yes.
Okay. The question was why driveways? Correct?
Right, and these are some of my old comments where if I kind of wanted it deleted, I'd just put Y. As far as driveways, I don't think they need to be included with the max lot coverage. So that's what I put, why I recommend deleting it. It's up to y'all. Comments?
I wouldn't mind if it were paved driveways. But you can have a lot of different materials out there, and if somebody just has their dolomite or their limestone driveway, I don't think it should count. But if it's a paved driveway, I think that's different, has different impacts on runoff and things like that.
Paved or concrete?
You've got, because you've got concrete patios counted, so you might as well put paved or concrete driveways.
I'd be fine with that.
We replaced features with structures.
Good.
Page
Um,
210, max coverage.
So features more clearly define patios, paved driveways than actual buildings.
I don't know, it's just wording to me. I'm not, so, right after,
I'm okay with structures.
Oh, I was good with that.
okay.
Okay. screening,
Did the rest of you not look at the definitions? Because honestly,
I looked at it, and you had it written down. Why
Mhm,
write it down again?
whatever.
We had a blue add in on road, though.
Pretty-
But it's fine.
because we had put roads, that whole blue section in, we put the definition in.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Screening was another one that we added.
Let me catch up, please. There we go. Okay.
There we go.
This
And we
was-
at page
Chain link
215.
fence with property, or privacy slats, windbreak,
Yeah.
i.e. is a windbreak.
So we added all that.
That's fine.
And we're
For
good with
comments.
the quarter mile?
Yeah.
Okay.
Vehicle is a new definition, and what we have is incorrect. The correct is 31-1-101, and we can bring that into,
Oh, instead of 13.5.201.
correct.
Okay.
Yep, so there was a wrong reference on there.
Okay.
So it's
have that definition here.
What is it?
What is it? What was the number?
31-1
What does it state?
dash 101. Sorry.
One.
It says a device in, upon, or by which any person or property may be transported or drawn upon a highway, excluding devices moved by human power or used exclusively upon rails or tracks, implements of husbandry, machinery used in construction work not mainly used for the transportation of property over highways, and pedestrian vehicles while operated by a person who by reason of a physical disability is otherwise unable to move about as a pedestrian. So those are the exceptions.
It's pretty broad.
So it's a,
What about my wheelbarrow?
so, that,
Just saying.
so this
As long as
is
it's not
the
motorized, you're okay.
state's definition with those excluding.
Okay, can you read it again?
Yeah.
Again, I have problems hearing.
So it's a device in, upon, or by which any person or property may be transported or drawn upon a highway.
So,
Exclusions
Okay.
are devices moved by human power, are used exclusively upon rails or tracks. Exclusion is implements of husbandry, machinery used in construction work not mainly used for the transportation of property over highways. And the exclusion is any pedestrian vehicle while operated by a person who by reason of physical disability is otherwise unable to move as a pedestrian. So a motorized wheelchair is not a vehicle.
If you have the state of Wyoming's definition in there, you can't hardly go wrong with that.
Do you need to use, instead of the word highway, since this is a state statute, you need to use the word public road?
We can?
does the definition, again, I
No,
have
there's a lot
problems
of-
hearing and whatever.
Well, that's
Does,
dedicated.
does that
public.
include trailers and snow machines and bike hauls
I
and?
think I'd leave highway on there because that's what the state definition is. I would leave the state definition in there the way it reads and not add something or change it.
Yeah, I don't think you can go wrong with the state definition.
That's the easiest way to do it. That way it's 100% defendable.
Like it or not, that's the defendable one, yeah.
And if we leave the statute number in there, it actually breaks down even further into different categories.
Right, but again, does that definition also include trailers and snow machines and?
Trailers aren't because they're not self-propelled.
I didn't hear self-propelled. Did you say
Yeah,
self?
she said
Yep.
self-propelled.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like I said, I
That's
can't
why-
hear
That's why
and-
Rob's wheelbarrow didn't count.
Okay,
I tried to get it in there.
thank you.
That's the correction to vehicles.
Okay.
Um,
See the word itself.
wetlands
See, I didn't hear her say
was added per,
that. Stop for just a second, please. Peter's reviewing something.
So,
Can you kind of pull your mic in a little? Because Jim says he can't hear, and he didn't
No,
turn
I
his
can
hearing
hear
aids.
just fine. I can't understand the definition when that's just read. I like to,
Oh, okay.
I'm a that learner, not that learner.
so my hesitation is this statute, if we're just referring to 31-1-101 and nothing more, this thing goes on for pages. And it says, it's got definitions for commercial vehicle, dealer, department, factory price, implement of husbandry. I mean, you can see where I'm going. Motorhome, motorcycle, off-road recreational vehicle. By the time you get down to Romanet, you're on page 8, Romanet 20 XXVI, so 26. I don't see self-propelled in the definition of vehicle. So, I guess to your point, Jim, a vehicle is a trailer.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
she said there was an exception.
Is it-
That's
is it
where it
tra-
fell
is
in, was
trailer
the exception.
listed on there as,
She listed as the exception that it has to be, if it's self-propelled, that's something that doesn't count.
So, I think this 10-page statute,
we can,
we ought to be a little more specific and intentional, I think. And if it's going to be self-propelled, then I'm comfortable. And if it's, who the heck, if it's a real broad definition, then I think we just got to look at it again. And I also think that the people that are reviewing this over the next 2 weeks might want to have a clear understanding of what it is too.
okay. I will email you guys another definition.
That'll be fine.
Okay?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So that brings us to the last one, which according to the P and Z draft, the request was to put a definition for wetland in.
My only question on that is referencing a federal statute that is extremely broad.
That was
But-
my concern, is if we just have wetlands somewhere, do we still have wetlands somewhere?
I thought we took them all
We
out.
took it out, right?
I thought we took them all out,
Yeah,
and I can
so
do another
if we
search
took
to
them
make
out,
sure
then
that
we-
we can take this
We
out.
better
Remove
take it
it
out
out.
too.
Yep.
Because the national
If-
definition of a wetland is if it was ever wet someday, one time.
Well, and that was my concern, is because
Yeah.
if we had wetland in there, then it could be
I see it
one of my
on,
irrigation ditches.
I see the word wetlands on page 41, when the applicant has to the maximum extent practicable, protect stream corridors and wetlands. Then I see it, we took it out on page 80. Then I see it again
I-
on page 168.
I don't mind leaving the definition in, I just don't want it tied to the federal definition.
If you-
Well, it
if you
is
just-
40 CFR.
Yeah, but if they just said is a wetland, and this is the technical definition, is related to soil types and vegetative types in an area, those are the defining factors of what a wetland is. So all draws are not wetlands. They have to have the right soil types and they have to have the right vegetative types to fall into that category.
So,
Just
Mr.
like I
Chairman, are
read
you
it down
saying we just delete the reference to the CFR?
Yes, that's, I mean,
I'm good with that.
Okay.
That way, if it changes,
yeah.
or if there's more to it than what we have here, nobody's going to.
Well, I-
And it doesn't have to be saturated soil conditions, it just has to be appropriate soil conditions, because there is a difference.
Yeah, I'm good with it then, just take it out.
Yeah.
Take the CNFR out, CFR.
CFR.
Well, it just rolls off my tongue, guys. I mean,
And that goes through all of the edits.
Going back, what was the statute that you were that you're wanting to use for the number? 31.
31-1-101.
Okay.
Okay, so we've gone through the entire document except for nuisance, and we said we were going to leave that alone. Since we said we were going to move the recommendation requirements for wildfire protection areas to another appendix, we've had at least 3 people that have worked on this suggest that it needs to have some of this stuff taken out and not even carry it forward, and then they can go back and work it later. So the question is, do you want to take some of the vegetation management and defensible space out, I think was one of them. And I think the building designs and materials was the other one, but
Mr. Chairman, the only thing that they recommended was leaving in the height
roads.
and the width or on both driveways and roadways so that they could get in, as well as the numbering. That's the only thing they recommended leaving in.
Do we want to just make it a recommendation, leave it in, make it a recommendation, and just call it good?
Recommendation, we leave everything in, or
No.
you've got to leave some of this stuff in.
What's in, make it a recommendation, basically, except for like the road width and whatever. I don't know.
And just make everything else voluntary. If we did that, then that
And
would be
then,
fine.
yeah, it seemed like that I heard a comment that a lot of that was added. Everybody that signed the letter, a lot of that was added after they signed it, is what I heard. So I don't know whether that's fair to just leave it in there.
The grants he's requesting rely on the 2014 Natrona County Wildfire Hazard Mitigation Plan being updated and the current zoning rewrite continuing. So
So Brian.
If you leave that in there as voluntary, you are doing that. You're taking care of that. You're putting that they will recommend, they will work with the property owners to get that taken care of, but it does not make it mandated. And then with the width and the heights of the clearance around the roads, a lot of that's already taken care of inside of the International Fire Code that we already have. So that does not have to be in there. But that being said, the driveways are not covered underneath the International Fire Code, and that would be something that would be as part of the wildland urban interface to make sure that they have access on driveways as well.
So here's my suggestion. Under vegetation management and defensible space, add best practices to the end of that. And then you can use mitigation plan and zoning certificates, whatever, and take the shalls out of them.
Which section were we at?
This would be the
Fire.
fire mitigation.
Yep.
It was sub 2.
D2.
So where it says vegetation management defensible space, if you put best practices at the end of that, up the very top, under 2, it's right there.
Right here?
Yeah, and if you put best practices there
As part of the heading?
as part of the heading, and then it, right off the bat, it says it's not mandatory. And I think that's what we've heard, was that the best way to do this from those that are going to help implement this is gives them the opportunity to go out there and do it. And as we've said, this is going to be stripped out of the zoning anyway to some degree and put in its own plan that's going to be reworked anyway. But
Mr. Chairman,
I don't know.
if I understood the letters right that came across, the only, D1 is basically the one that everybody's in agreement needs to be there. The rest of it needs to be worked on, and
Right.
just as a recommendation.
That's my understanding too.
Yeah, I thought we were just gonna take out all the shalls and put in shoulds in this paragraph, D2, vegetation management.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm saying is, as far as leaving it in for the plan, if you put it as best practices at the end, and then you took out all the shoulds, and you put shall.
No,
No.
take out
Or
the shalls and
shalls
put should.
You should, excuse
Other
me.
way around, yeah.
The version that we have posted online has shoulds.
Right,
So the shalls were all taken out on that
on
section.
all the way through it?
The only shalls that remain are that mitigation plan shall be submitted, provisions and zoning certificates shall be issued
And those are
after approval. So those, I think, were the shalls that stayed.
But that's not what they were talking about.
And then D, vegetation, it looks like all of those were updated to shoulds. So should be removed, should be treated.
Right, and I guess the mitigation plan shall be submitted would imply that you're gonna have to go through all these vegetation
Yep.
plans. I don't know what is intended in a mitigation plan if it doesn't go through the vegetation management recommendations, the defensible space, those there. I guess my question is, the mitigation and zoning certificates, I can understand the zoning certificate having a shall on it. I don't know about the mitigation plan. I just don't know what is intended to be in the mitigation plan. If it says I gotta follow all these recommendations in my plan.
So you're saying they have to submit a plan, but.
But I
it
don't know
doesn't
what
have
the
to have
plan is.
Anything on it,
Yeah.
because they're all shoulds instead of shalls.
Right.
So
So
why,
here's a blank
why
piece of
submit a
paper.
plan?
Yeah.
With the heading.
Okay, here it is. Yeah, there's no reason to have that in there, because the way I read this also too is basically the only thing that they want mandated is section D1.
Then that's where
Yeah.
you could strip out mitigation plan out of there. I don't know
I agree.
what the purpose of it is. The zoning certificate says you're going to have a fire inspector go through and look at everything to start with. So the mitigation plan implies something that's going to be long-term, which I think comes under those best practices.
So it could also be the item that they are reviewing. So in order to get a certificate approval
Okay,
by those people, but what are they reviewing and approving? The mitigation plan.
But there
Right.
there isn't a mitigation plan right now, and so what we're saying is that if it's voluntary, if they decide not to do mitigation, then there is no mitigation plan. If they, I mean, that's really what it amounts to. If they choose to do one, but it's just, there's a lot of areas that you can't do a mitigation plan because it's not economically feasible or vegetatively feasible.
I have a question.
yes.
How are they going to issue a zoning certificate if there's no standard to judge it or to review it?
That was part of my question, was
Yeah.
if,
So why not take out both B and C?
Yeah.
That's fine with me.
Because otherwise you've got a requirement that they provide a plan that's a blank piece of paper.
Well, no, because the mitigation plan for vegetation management and defensible space and fire safety, and then it comes underneath there and lists all those things that you'd have to do in order to get a mitigation plan together.
we
Yeah, but
could
they're shoulds
change it to a
It should be
should.
instead
should.
of shall.
So
Yeah, it should be should.
a mitigation plan should be submitted?
Yes. Or
Well, the
recommend,
only-
or
yeah.
recommended that it, to be submitted.
Non-mitigation plans will let it grow.
If you, if a
it
fire
works.
inspector or designated official or building official goes up there and he looks around and he says, this is too much fuel right in the way and it needs a whole bunch of work, is he gonna deny the certificate or deny the,
You can't,
Based off of what?
No, he has
because they're
nothing to
just
base it off of.
recommendations.
It's all should.
It's all should. not
okay.
shall.
As long as he's not gonna withhold any of those permits to go ahead and do your house or whatever you're
Yep.
gonna do.
Is there any
Yep,
downside to
It's
taking
recommendations
paragraphs?
and education and not mandates.
If we're all should and not shall.
Okay.
Having
over it
them,
with them and
having
explain.
them submit something is as a should, as a best practice that they should submit a mitigation plan?
So you'd like that better
Mm-hmm.
than nothing?
I'm comfortable with that they should submit a best practice plan or something.
Yeah.
That's-
Should be
If they
aware
don't want
of
to,
the
then
problem.
You can't hold it against them.
Okay. So.
Well, I think at a minimum, though,
Two Bs.
in order to get a zoning certificate, they're gonna have to have a fire inspector go up and
At
as,
least review it with them.
as we had, I can't remember which one of our expert fire guys came in and said, we go through and some of the stuff is just not feasible and some of the stuff
That
is.
was Brian
Brian
Anderson. He's one of the ones that
So-
said, and Brian even said that his property, he can't do it.
Yeah.
There's no way in the world he can even do it on his property because of the type of trees.
Yeah, so-
and the vegetation and everything, so.
I know this has been probably one of the most
Contentious.
contentious. And that and building materials. And I think
So-
that's taken care of.
So are we in agreement that we're gonna leave paragraphs B and C, but change the shall and B
To
to
should.
should?
To should.
Should.
Is that
Should.
good enough? The alternative is to take out B and C, but
Either or. I mean, you
Yeah.
can't require
just-
something that.
let's
may-
just vote,
Yeah.
because I see it both ways.
If you
I don't
have it-
mind
If you
this-
have it in there, it sounds like they have to do it, even if,
I
I
mean, if
mean,
you-
some people are gonna read it that way.
But if you have it
don't.
in there, you got the framework for a future
They should
plan,
have it.
If need be.
I'm all right with should.
I don't care.
Fine. As long as we do something that
As long as
makes
it's
it
not
not, because I think everybody's, you're gonna tell me I'm gonna have to go up there and mow my grass. You're gonna tell me I gotta go over and cut these trees. I think that's what,
Boy, there's a fine line. We tell them they're gonna have to do everything all over this document.
well, but this is after the fact. So,
So I'm adding, Title II will be vegetation management and defensible space best practices.
Do you want to include 3? Building material or not?
building materials actually been stripped down to other than, the only thing that's there is really chimneys.
And that's just spark arresters, and
Yeah.
that's, there's
So we're
no
all good with that, too?
no problem with spark arresters, you ought to have that
No,
on.
I mean, the whole section of 3.
Because it's ignition resistant materials as identified and nationally recognized are recommended. So we've taken shall to are recommended.
Right.
So, yeah.
So the only one that, going off of the letters of recommendation, the one that's not necessarily a recommendation
The spark arrestor.
is the, no, it's
That's-
the
Building.
driveways and
The driveways,
stuff
yeah.
like that.
Yep, yep.
At the top.
Access.
And this still gives the working group the opportunity to come back and resolve this further.
And they've got framework.
Yeah. We're not losing everything, we're just making it a little more flexible. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else? Okay, so
Timeline.
timeline is Christie's going to get this out as soon as she can. We're going to post it on the web for everyone to read. It will be blue lined and red lined. Is that how we're going to do it?
Yes, sir.
With an explanation of what blue and red means for those that don't.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Missy, can we? Having issues there. Can we get 2 copies out? Pull the rest of the copies that are up there so that there's no confusion, or put them in a separate page or something like that. But put 2 copies out, one a red line of what we just did, but also a pure, clean copy that has no blue lines, no red lines, but is what we just went through.
We can replace the one that's the draft planning and zoning.
Mhm.
That, except for that's the one that you're actually motioning on.
No, I understand, but if you can get a clean one that is easily.
Easy to read.
Easily readable, so that everybody can see not the changes, but the actual body of this is what it is.
So I can create a new button on here and have one draft county commissioners with the red line and one county commissioners as would read.
Yes,
Yeah,
Right.
but you're going to put, I think we talked about putting a draft watermark on
Draft
it.
watermark across all of them.
both,
Yeah.
yes, please.
And
As
we'll
we
have, and we will have to have some type of document that literally is going to say paragraph, ... changed an and to an or, to amend the planning and zoning draft. So all the changes we've made, we're going to have to document that they were made to the planning draft.
For the motion coming
To,
up.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
But can't we just do a red line comparison of the two?
Well, we have to be able to, I don't know, we'll ask Eric on that.
I mean, I'd hate
So
to make a motion
we could
on
also
each and every one.
reference this, your spreadsheet, your comment
Okay.
spreadsheet.
Whatever,
We didn't accept a lot of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
If-
we didn't do it.
There's a lot
and
of
we
it.
added
I
some
would-
of it.
Okay.
we'll work on that part.
Gotta
That's,
pitch that now.
we'll have time to do that. I think it's most important to get it out for the public to read and review.
Okay, so the next question is, on the 20th, we really need to have, what's going to happen after that? We have public comment the 20th about what changes may occur. Then, when does this board say yes or no, or do we do it along the way? I mean, when are you going to, are we going to vote on a final product?
That is the preference of the board. If everyone is comfortable, you can vote, we can vote on the 20th. If you want to continue to make some changes, we can table it. The only thing we had to do is we could not vote before the 45-day period.
Well, so what I'm thinking about is there may be some, like the realtors are gonna look at this and have some comments.
They were
We-
supposed to have comments to us quite a while ago.
Well, but they didn't have a finished document. And so now that we've made the changes, now they have that clean copy to look at. So how are we gonna handle those comments that we hear on the 20th? Or do we start earlier? Or do we go to the wee hours of the morning? Or do we punt?
Let's play it by ear.
Okay,
I think,
we'll have
I
it-
think the finished product is going to be substantially more palatable to everyone.
well, it will, but then,
There's not going to be one thing that we'll ever put out that everybody's going to agree to.
well, that's true. Even us.
That's right.
But, okay, so the plan is to take comment, but each individual comment will say, yeah, we like that, and change it, or vote yes or no.
We can amend the document if somebody wants to on the 20th.
Okay.
Right.
But it requires us to make the change, not,
Mr. Chairman, it
Yes.
seems to me that as soon as this goes live on the website, people can continue to comment, just like they can be commenting today, and have been able to comment for the last 2 years. We have a public hearing on the 20th, and between now and the end of the close of the public hearing, we'll have, I think, a pretty good idea of whether we're going to move forward or not, and whether there are a couple changes, or maybe there are many changes, but I think that we would bring those, but we don't necessarily have to go through every single comment. It's the ones that rise to the,
Right.
these make sense to a majority of the commission.
So do we do that in the interim, or are we gonna have a work session like the 20th? We start out and we go through those comments that have been received? Go through them before? Okay. You don't wanna meet all day long?
Well, I think that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
yes.
Christie, how long do you think before you can get those 2 copies out posted onto the site?
The goal is to have them tomorrow on the site, pending working with Logan Simpson to get the clean PDF up there.
So
Okay.
that's nearly
Okay.
2 weeks of review by the public. They can get comment to us one way or the other.
Yeah, as soon as they have comments, they need to ship them in to us so that we can distribute them between ourselves then.
It is the holiday season, though.
Well, after,
Yeah. It's, I don't know of any
So
holiday
between now and then. okay.
Okay.
All right, are we good?
Good as it's gonna get.
All right, we're gonna take 5. 5 or 10?
When are you gonna deal with the nuisance part of this? You guys have to just get off over.
The nuisance as well, the nuisance and the mitigation, we stripped out, and they'll become their own resolution. It will come completely out of zoning, and the new commission can sit down and work it with the public at that point. Right now, it's actually a little, we loosened it some from what it was.
We did that, but I'm curious who they speak over today. I'm kind of out of the loop. I went to her to get copies of stuff that wasn't ready, but turned out was ready for you, but not ready for me. And
Yeah, we've basically just took it out and left it the way it's been. And then, because zoning and nuisance are actually treated differently in the state statutes, it needs to have its own separate resolution outside of zoning. So we needed to leave it in for the time being, and then when it goes to its own, it's easy to strip it out of the zoning without affecting the document itself, the remainder of the document.
Okay,
Right. Woo-hoo. Okay, we go throw this, babe.